Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at how we can deploy an AWS CDK stack using GitHub Actions. So before we jump into actually configuring GitHub Actions and AWS to allow us to deploy from the Actions workflows, let's just think about why we would want to deploy from a GitHub Actions CI environment versus just deploying locally. There's two major reasons why you would want to deploy from a CI environment like GitHub Actions rather than having people do it individually from their local machines. The first one being a security perspective. Imagine if you had 5 developers in a team, each having production keys on their machine. Someone goes out, machine gets stolen, production keys are out there. So you want to minimize that risk at all times by not having people have it on their local machines. The second reason is your deployment should happen from a single source, which always has the latest code, being the main branch on a remote repository such as GitHub. This is because if you deployed from a local environment and the developer didn't have the latest code pulled in on the main branch when they deployed to production, then you'd possibly cause a regression in features and code. This won't happen if you deploy always from the remote one because it'll always be the latest code. So with those reasons covered, let's jump into actually looking how we can configure AWS and GitHub Actions to set this all up for us. We're going to be starting with the AWS side. So with that all covered, let's jump into AWS and actually look at configuring how we can set this up. Once you're logged into your AWS dashboard, the first thing you want to do is head over to IAM, which you can get to by searching in the top left, and then just clicking IAM. From there, you want to go under policies because we're going to create a new custom policy, and then create policy. We're then going to go to the JSON editor, and then I'm just going to paste in the policy, which looks like this. Just tidy this up quickly. And what this policy is allowing us to do is assume other roles. So as you can see here, we're using the STS assume role action, which basically just allows a user to assume other roles. And then we're applying that to all of the CDK roles. When you bootstrap a CDK user on your local machine, before you can actually deploy using the CDK, it creates a bunch of roles on AWS. This policy will allow us to assume those roles during the deployment workflow so that we can actually use their permissions. Once you've created that, press next for tags. We're not going to add any tags, so just next review. And then we're going to call it CDK underscore deploy, like so. Then we're just going to press create policy. Once that's created, we're then going to head over to groups and then create a new group. And then we're going to call that CDK-deploy. Then we're going to attach the CDK policy that we created earlier and then create group. The last thing we need to do in IAM is then go create a new user. So we're going to create a user and then we're going to call that CDK-deploy. We don't need to give it any access to the console because it's only going to be used from the deployment workflow on GitHub. So push next. We're then going to do add user to group. We're going to tick the CDK deploy group, which has the policy that we created a moment ago. Push next. Then we're not going to add any tags and we're going to press create user. So now we've created a new policy, a new user group, and then a new user. The reason we didn't just attach the policy directly to the user is because it's actually best practice to create a group first and then attach your policies and users directly to the group and not attach policies directly to users. With that now created, we're almost finished with IAM. We just need to create some access keys and secret access keys to allow GitHub to authenticate with AWS. So to do that, click on your new user, CDK deploy, security credentials, and then scroll down to access keys here, push create access key, and then we're going to be doing command line interface, then just tick I understand. And then we are not going to give it a description, but you can give it a description if you want to. If you want to call it CDK deploy or test, whatever you want to call it, it's a description that helps you identify it, and then push create access key. What you want to do is you want to copy these two values because it's the only time you're going to get to see the secret access key. You can see the access key again in the future, but you won't see the secret access key. So make sure you copy both of them, make sure you keep them secret. Standard practices apply as you would to any other EMB variable. And then once you've copied both of them and kept them secure, then we're going to jump over to GitHub and we're now actually going to configure our GitHub Actions secrets. With our new access key and secret access key generated for our new user in IAM, let's jump over to GitHub and configure the secrets on the repository. So I'm going to be using my CDK tutorials repo for this. It actually is a slightly different configuration because it's got multiple CDK projects within it, but I will highlight the changes you need to make if you're just running this in a single repository, or when your CDK project is at the root level and not buried within a subdirectory. But it's a rather simple change, so you don't need to worry about that. So once you've got your CDK project on GitHub, or you've just created a new repo before you've pushed to it, head over to the settings page and then go to secrets and variables under security and then actions. And then you'll want to add in a new repository secret. We're going to call it AWS Access Key ID. Like so. And then we're just going to paste in the access key that we generated. And then, as you probably guessed, we're now going to have another one, which is called AWS secret key. And then we're going to paste in the secret key, which we generated earlier. With them two now added in, they're now ready to be used in our GitHub Actions workflow. So let's jump over and configure that next. So with our new GitHub Actions secrets configured in GitHub, we just need to configure the actual workflow. Open up your repo in your favorite IDE. I'm going to be using VS Code, and we just need to create some new files and folders within the project. First thing we need to do is create a .github folder in the root of the project. Then inside of that folder, we need to create a workflows folders, like so. And then inside of that, we're then going to create a new YAML file, which is going to be called CDK prod deploy .yml. So after we've created our CDK prod deploy YAML file, we're then going to paste into it our workflow. So our workflow looks like this, and let's just quickly run through it. So the name of the workflow is CDK prod deploy, as the name of the file would suggest. We are triggering it on pushes to the main branch, which is important because that's the branch we want to deploy. The job we're running is AWS CDK, running on Ubuntu latest. And then the first step is checking out the code as normal. Then we configure our Node.js environment using Node version 16. We then install the root dependencies of the project, which is important. I'll come back to this in a moment because it relates to the sub-project, sub-directory CDK config I mentioned earlier. We then install the dependencies of the project and the stack that we want to deploy. You can see that through the working directory here. That's the directory the command will run in. We then do a global install of the AWS CDK. We then run a custom GitHub action from AWS that allows us to configure our AWS environment in GitHub Actions with the secret key and the secret access key that we added to GitHub earlier. This is important because this is the actual credentials that the CDK would use to push up to AWS. An important thing to note here is you should change this region to the region that you'll be deploying in. So in my case, I'm deploying to London, which is EU West 2. But if you were deploying to Ireland, for example, you'd say EU West 1 or US East 2, wherever your region is. We then do a CDK synth command to make sure the stack synthesizes correctly. Again, this is run in the working directory of the CDK stack, which in my case is the DynamoDB compression stack that I wrote for a different tutorial. And then finally, we run the deploy command from the CDK, so CDK deploy, again running in the working directory where the stack is. In this case, we also push in the all flag to make sure we get all the stacks in the project, as well as require approval never, because on the CI environment, you can't push yes or no to whether you want to deploy. So instead we just pass this flag to skip that step. As mentioned, the important thing to note here in this example is I'm running on a sub directory where the stack is located. The stack is here in a subfolder. If your CDK stack was located in the root directory of your project, you can omit these commands. So these ones, as well as the working directory ones you see here and here. So your finished workflow would look closer to this, where everything is located in the root directory. Obviously for this example and what I'm doing, that's not the case. So I'm just going to add those back in, like so. And now we can push our new workflow file up to GitHub and let that run, and then hopefully it will deploy without issues. So with that all covered, we can now add our file in Git, stage it, commit it, then push it up to GitHub, and then watch our workflow run. So let's just do that now. So I'm just going to add the file and do ci added prod deploy workflow. Then we're going to push that up to GitHub, like so. And then I'm just going to head over to GitHub, refresh my actions page, and as you can see there, the prod workflow was just triggered. So let's just fast forward until that is complete, because this can take a couple of minutes to complete normally. And our CDK deploy workflow has just finished. So you can see that obviously by the green tick. And if we click into our workflow and then into the job within the workflow, we can see that the deploy here ran without issue and deployed everything. We can also validate this if we head over to our AWS dashboard and then just refresh that. In this case, I deployed a few Lambda functions. So you can see here under functions, I then have my DynamoDB compression stack write handler and read handler. So the resources have now been deployed, and you can see they were also deployed 1 minute ago. And now that workflow will run automatically every time you push to main. So every time you push to main with new changes to your stack, it will then redeploy to your production AWS account, meaning you never have to do any manual deploys from your local machine again, and we get the benefits that we all talked about earlier with code security, as well as making sure we don't have any regressions in the code. And that's the end of this tutorial. So within this tutorial, we've covered everything from creating a new IAM policy, user and user group to handle the CDK deploy, creating an access key and secret access key for that user, before then configuring the access key and secret access key for that user in GitHub settings. We then created our new workflow locally before pushing it, and then having it run and deploy our new infrastructure on AWS for us, all from the GitHub Actions pipeline. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, please consider sharing with others so they might find it helpful too. And until next time, thank you for watching.